tonight's Indiana debate for House of Representatives, State of Indiana, District 3. District 3 represents parts of Gary, Hobart, Lake Station, and New Chicago. Joining us tonight are State Representative Ragen Hatcher and Hobart City Attorney Heather McCarthy. The seat was formerly held by I didn't say that. Early voting is already underway, and Election Day is May 7th. You can find more information about these candidates and others on your ballot by visiting vote411.org. Tonight's debate is made possible by the League of Women Voters of the Calumet Area, Legacy Foundation, Rise NWI, and Lakeshore Public Media. I'm Tom Maloney, tonight's moderator. This debate is being live streamed on Facebook, as well as live on air on 89.1 FM. For tonight's debate, we encourage the audience to ask questions. Tonight's questions will come from myself as well as you, members of the audience. There are note cards that you can fill out, and we'll do our best to get to those questions and topics that several questions might address. Please make sure when asking a question that it pertains to both candidates. I ask that you hold your applause until the end of the debate following closing statements from the candidates. The rules for tonight's debate are as follows. Candidates have 90 seconds for their opening and closing remarks. Each candidate will also have 90 seconds to answer each question during the rebuttal. Rebuttals are not permitted, but candidates can use their time to answer or rebuttal from a previous question. There is no saving of time. Therefore, if a candidate does not use all 90 seconds of that answer, that time is not permitted to be used by the candidate again. Before tonight's debate, candidates drew numbers to decide who would go first for their opening statements and who would go first for their closing statements. With that, Ragen Hatcher has 90 seconds for her opening statement, followed by Heather McCarthy. Heather will then answer the first question first, followed by Ragen. Are we good? All right. Ragen, you have 90 seconds.
Thank you. My name is Ragen Hatcher. I am your current state representative of House District 3. I'd like to thank Lakeshore Public Media, the League of Women Voters, and Rise Northwest Indiana for putting on this important forum tonight. After law school, I came back to my hometown where I was born and raised of Gary, Indiana, and became a Lake County prosecutor under the leadership of one of my many endorsers, Bernard Carter. After that, I went to the Gary Community School Corporation and worked as their in-house counsel, learning much about the educational process and what it means to be downstate and have an impact on that. After that role, I moved on to the Lake County, the Calumet Township as their in-house counsel and learned about property taxes, the appeal process, and other important aspects that impact all of us. After serving 6 years then on the Gary Common Council as the at-large representative and learning much about not just the legislative process, but having an opportunity to propose ordinances and laws for the city of Gary, I ran in 2019 to defend and advocate for our community on a multitude of issues. Thank you for coming tonight. I look forward to discussing successful legislation I have passed and what I plan to do in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Please hold your applause until after the finality of the debate. Thank you. Heather, you have 90 seconds.
Okay, I'm Heather McCarthy. I'm a lifelong resident of Northwest Indiana. I currently reside in the city of Gary and also have a law practice there. My law practice is primarily in the area of municipal law. I also have a variety of legal services I offer to the residents of District 3. I am the Hobart City Attorney and have also provided municipal law services to the city of Gary within the district. Prior to being an attorney, I had a lengthy career in mental health advocacy, writing grants, state and federal, for securing funds for behavioral health wellness throughout Northwest Indiana. That's still a passion of mine. I currently sit on the Methodist Hospital Board and also chair their foundation. Worked very hard locally in the district for the municipalities, serving clients. Now want to do that hard work at the state level. My education, went to school as a single working parent, have bachelor's and master's degree in English from Purdue Lafayette. I have a master's in public administration from Indiana University Northwest and also my law degree from Valparaiso University. I just want to say a big thank you to all those who are supporting my candidacy. Many of you are here this evening. I want to thank the elected officials who are here from...
That'll be your time.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, so really quick, I'll let candidates bleed over just a moment if they're finishing up statements, but if you're still going into it, we'll have to cut you off. We don't have the hook anymore. We got yelled at for using the hook on candidates years ago, so we don't use those anymore. Answering the first question first, then, will be Heather. Through the last few years, we've seen and heard many politicians across the country deny the results of their local elections. Will you accept the results of this primary election as decided on by voters?
Yes, I will definitely accept the results. Having volunteered for elections, I was one of the lawyers for Obama back years ago, seeing all the work that goes in from not only volunteers but our election board. I have faith in our process and the results of the election. To go back to my introduction, I just want to say a brief thank you to the elected officials here tonight from Lake Station, also from Hobart and New Chicago, Mayor Carroll, a thank you to Mayor Huddleston, and also to the town manager, Sue Pelfrey, who's here this evening.
Thank you. Reagan, you have 90 seconds.
Thank you. I think that, of course, I would accept the results of the election. This is one of those overreaches of government that we've been talking about since the Trump administration. And I just want to bring attention to House Bill 1235, which I believe is another overreach of government. In that bill, the legislature decided to overturn a lawsuit that has been pending in the city of Gary and take over the judicial branch of government. We have to put a stop to this. There are 3 independent branches of government: judicial, executive, and legislative, and they all work independently but together. House Bill 1235 is just one example that I'd like to bring up tonight that occurred in the legislature over this last session. Thank you.
Thank you. Answering first on question number 2 will be Reagan, while we get some water mopped up here off to the side there. What is or are the biggest issues facing the 3rd District?
Yeah, thanks for that question. And it's a really critical one. It's hard to talk about the most important issue. There are many issues facing District 3 and that we fought for and against in this last session. One being the environment. In this last legislative session, we passed laws that now require a speed up of the lead line replacement. That lead line replacement is important to our drinking water for our children and for at-risk adults. Also, we made sure that the lakefront, any city with a lakefront has to have the proper safety equipment on it. Another big issue is education. In this legislative session, it was passed that any 3rd grader who did not pass iLearn would not move forward to the 4th grade. However, the Democratic caucus in Indianapolis has been working hard to make sure that not only is kindergarten a requirement, but we fund universal preschool for all children in the state of Indiana. And finally, taxes. This year we saw a big increase in the property taxes in Northwest Indiana due to the reassessment. That's one of those other issues that has become a really big deal in the community, and we are working to find legislative solutions.
Thank you. Heather, repeating the question there as we were mopping up the water, what is or are the biggest issues facing the 3rd District?
Yeah, I think there's quite a few issues. I would agree with the environmental issues, but what really has resonated with me and in talking with various school teachers and board members, the whole issue of our children not being ready to have proficiency by the 3rd grade in reading is huge. I think that goes hand in hand with economic development. In speaking with teachers, how do we address this issue? I don't think retaining or retention is the solution. I think we need to provide support and stability for the families, and we need to pay qualified teachers, but we can't expect them to do everything. We need support and resources in the schools. I'm a big proponent of wraparound services. In listening to teachers, a lot of this goes hand in hand with attendance. And if we see that a child's not showing up for school, we need those supports in place to make sure that happens. And we also need to really focus on our economic development so that these families that we're working with not only have support, but they can have jobs, which lead to more stability and will help them and help us to get our children ready to get to school and be ready to learn, so they don't have those instabilities with poor attendance and other issues that might be caused by transient households. So those are the two issues I feel are most important.
All right, we'll let the extra moment slide. This is an elected position. If elected to this position, how will you work with local community leaders from Gary to Hobart and all points in between? Heather, you'll be going first.
I've thought about this a lot, and I think being a state legislator, I know it's very important to be present during the legislative session, and whether that's 3 months or 4 months, but also when we're back in the communities, it's important to maintain those relationships within the community. I think this also goes to the issue of economic development. Would really like to have maybe a quarterly roundtable to keep in touch with all the communities, what they're getting ready for, what the resources are they need. I know in the city of Hobart, there's a lot going on with their lakefront district and the business corridor. Having worked in City Hall in the city of Gary, I know they have numerous projects they're getting ready for with the transit oriented district and the transit development districts. Having the communities come together to discuss these issues, knowing what their needs are, but also what they're best suited for, I think is very important for not only bringing them together, but having a state representative that's able and ready to go to the State House and to advocate and fight for what those needs are.
Thank you. And just a reminder for both candidates at any point, if you need me to ask the question again, please let me know. Reagan, again, this is an elected position. If elected, how will you work with local community leaders from Gary to Hobart and all points in between?
Yes, thank you for the question. And I think what has happened over my past 6 years in the position is you don't just work with the elected officials or the other elected officials within the district. Our main concern comes from residents, small business owners, and community members. We have 3 legislative forums per year. One pre-session, and we usually do that one before the November deadline, because in November is when all legislation must be filed. We have one mid-session to discuss what has been filed and what needs to go forward. And then we have a post-wrap-up session that just so the community can come back together. We can talk about the issues that we addressed during that legislative session and maybe what we need to do to move forward in the following session. There are a multitude of issues. Hobart, Lake Station, and Gary all have their own distinct issues, but at the State House, what we do is we pass legislation for every citizen in the state of Indiana. We bring the ideas from our community, but we pass legislation for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Reagan, you'll be answering this next question next. Legislators often vote for bills that compromise the citizens in Northwest Indiana. However, citizens in Northwest Indiana cannot vote against those bills or those legislators. How would you change that to ensure that Northwest Indiana has a stronger voice downstate?
Absolutely, and in my intro, I talked about how we play defense a lot, and that's absolutely true. Much of the legislation that comes through that may have a negative impact on Northwest Indiana could possibly have a positive impact on whoever that legislator is that's bringing the legislation. So, for example, rural areas may have one need while an urban area could have another. And so it's our job as the representative of those areas that may be negatively affected to not only talk to that other legislator, but explain to them why the legislation may hurt our community. And what we try to do is make amendments and change their legislation so we can all have a win. That rural legislator can go home and say, we did this for the community, and we can say that they did that, but it does not impact us in a negative way. And hopefully we can put some things in there that would be positive for us. But that takes reaching across the aisle, working with Republicans, and working with those who may not understand what happens in Northwest Indiana. Much of my time in the State House is spent explaining issues in Northwest Indiana and how we are so different than much of the rest of the state. So we work together, we work across the aisle, we work as a caucus to make sure that those issues do not impact us in a negative way and to push positive ways to impact Northwest Indiana and District 3.
Thank you. Heather, you have 90 seconds.
Can you repeat the question real quick?
Yes. Legislators often vote for bills that compromise the citizens in Northwest Indiana, yet the citizens in Northwest Indiana cannot vote against those legislators or those bills. How would you change that to ensure that Northwest Indiana has a stronger voice downstate?
So I think this goes back to the issue of why it's so very important for the state representative to have a real pulse on what's going on in the community in all the districts, know what the needs are, so that when they're sitting downstate and listening to legislation that comes up, completely understand it's from all over the state, dealing with a supermajority that's not our party, but in knowing your community, all your communities well, when something comes up, to really view that through the lens of District 3. And District 3 is such a diverse community. There's so many different issues, different challenges that we face. And I think just having the knowledge of them, I truly believe in inclusive government and that all voices should be heard and being accessible to that. And I think that's one of the key points that a state legislator should prioritize in their role.
Going first on this next question will be Heather. Do you support the sale of U.S. Steel to Nippon? Why or why not?
I don't know if it matters if I support it. I believe this is still being discussed now at the federal level. You know, there's been a lot of discussion about this in regards to the sale and also the issue with U.S. Steel and how their taxes are assessed and paying the fair share of taxes. I don't see how the sale really affects that, in that this self-assessment through, and however that formula works, I think we need to know more about it and we need more information, but in conjunction with the DLGF, so the Department of Local Finance, how that works with the industry. I understand there's a handful of industries that are assessed this way in regards to what they contribute to the tax base. I think we need to know more about that, but also this has been going on a long time and it's a legislative issue, so that's something to look at. But I think in terms of the tax issue, it's really about everyone paying their fair share, no one having to pay more than they need to, whether that's locally homesteads, whatever that might be. I think that's an important point. And whether the sale happens or not, that should be something that is in the forefront and on the top of our agendas.
I should note that I've been corrected. It's Nippon, not Nippon. I apologize. Thank you. Reagan, do you support the sale of U.S. Steel to Nippon? Why or why not?
Yeah, so I think it is important that we take a stand in whether or not we support this sale or not. Many of the employees of U.S. Steel are currently District 3 residents. We want to make sure that their union contract is honored by the new steel mill, Nippon. I think it's Nippon Steel. And so we want to make sure that they are protected throughout this process. So yes, I am interested in knowing whether or not the sale is going to go through, but also I want to make sure that our residents who are employees are treated fairly in the sale process. Also, I just want to take a second to explain the tax issue that goes on right now with the steel mills. Right now, U.S. Steel, along with other steel mills along the lakefront, are allowed to self-assess. Now, that's not unusual in Indiana. Many businesses are allowed to self-assess. However, the difference is that those steel mills we are not allowed to appeal their assessment. So if they say that their steel mill property is worth $1 million and we know it's worth $10 million and that's what they pay property tax on, we are not allowed to appeal that anymore. That legislation must change. It's not a question, it must change. We must work on that this upcoming session to make sure that U.S. Steel is paying its fair share of property taxes to Gary so we can do all the things needed with public safety, streets, and other issues within the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Please hold your applause until after the debate. Ma'am, thank you. Got to put on my teacher voice for that one. Or my dad voice, whichever. Answering first on this, on question number 6, will be Reagan. Do you support early childhood education for all? And if so, how would you look at funding that?
Yes. No, thank you for that question, because this has been a passion of mine down in at the State House. This session, there was a law passed that said that if a third grader does not pass iLearn, they are automatically retained. That is unfair, not just to the child, but to the parent and to other siblings in that household, because they're not given the opportunity. We introduced an amendment that said they could go to summer school, they could catch up on this so they could move on to the 4th grade. But right now, that's what the legislation says, and that's what the law says. So in Indiana, kindergarten is not required. Let me say that one more time. Kindergarten is not a requirement in the state of Indiana. You do not have to start school until you hit the 1st grade, which means that a student coming in with no educational background is entering the 1st grade not knowing their numbers, not knowing how to read, not knowing their letters, not knowing those basic things. What I propose and what I continue to propose on every year at the State House is required kindergarten and universal preschool for 3- and 4-year-olds. Now, the universal preschool would not be a requirement. However, it would be available to all for free. We have a multi-billion-dollar rainy day fund in the state of Indiana, and we need to start using that money for these types of programs for our children.
Thank you. Heather, you have 90 seconds.
Totally agree with increased preschool education, getting kids more ready for school. The answer is not retention. And we certainly need the resources to make sure that our kids have access not only to readiness for school, but also that they're getting the best education while they're in school. I'm a big proponent of a public school system. I think that's important. And in educating our children, that's one of the biggest things that we have to look at right now. And in terms of kindergarten, totally agree. I don't, certainly have nothing to argue about there. That needs to be mandatory. But, how do we get those resources, and how do we make sure that we have them for all of our children? And that's the issue, and I'm willing to go to the state to fight for that.
Thank you. Heather, you'll be answering first on this next question from the audience. State laws have been passed that only apply to the Gary Community School Corporation. Do you think that's fair, and what would you do to change that? I assume this is with regards to the state-appointed school board and the former control of DUEB.
Well, it's definitely a priority. In our district, we want the Gary schools to thrive. And in order to thrive, I support, the schools, and I know that's in the process. There's a school board in place now. They're not elected but appointed, but in place. I believe there's a search committee right now for a superintendent for the Gary schools. So these are all good steps in getting local control back for oversight of the schools. I think that that's going to be critical in the education for our children. We've seen during this process that there's been a lot of drops in academic scores, graduation rates. So certainly think that's important. In terms of getting special treatment, I know they're working with the Distress Unit Appeals Board, or DUAB is what they call it. Special treatment, I really don't see it that way. I mean, they were schools in need of help, and there's been a lot of concessions made to get them the help they need, which is so necessary, and that should continue. I know there's some issues regarding home for the school loan forgiveness from the Gary Public Schools, and I would be in support of that.
Thank you. Reagan, you have 90 seconds.
Can you repeat the question for me, please?
State laws have been passed that only apply to the Gary Community School Corporation. Do you think that's fair, and what would you do to change that?
Thank you. We call that special legislation. And down at the State House, what we find is that most special legislation has a negative impact on whatever the community is. As far as the school board and finally getting control back, last session I was able to pass an amendment, even though all of those members of our current school board are appointed and are appointed by state representatives. I was able to pass an amendment that made sure that each of our school board members would be from the city of Gary, so we could have local representation, even though they would still be appointed. Next session, we plan to go back to the State House, the delegation, the Democratic delegation, and work for the Gary Community School Corporation to have the same legislative benefits that charter schools have throughout the state of Indiana. Charter schools had their school loans forgiven. Charter schools can buy a building for $1. Charter schools can get school loans that are forgiven from the state of Indiana to build new schools and to implement new technology. We want those same things in our public schools. We want to have those same benefits so we can continue to compete and beat charter schools in the state of Indiana. Thank you.
Thank you. Answering first on this next question will be Reagan. I believe it's actually going to be a follow-up to the sale of U.S. Steel, but it doesn't say it in there, so I apologize in advance if it's a separate question. You can yell at me after the debate, I promise. How does the state stop the sale of a private business, or any business for that matter?
Yeah, that's a great question. We had a piece of legislation, 1183 this time, that blocked the sale of agricultural land to some foreign countries. And I thought that was such a strange bill when it first came in front of me, but then I thought about Nippon Steel and how now we have a foreign company coming into Indiana purchasing a United States-owned steel mill for since 1906. And so I understand why that legislation was put in place. What we tried to do as part of that legislation was, because that sale was pending and we thought it was going to go through, was to change the tax parameters to make sure that if there was a foreign company that came in and bought U.S. Steel, that they would not receive the same tax benefits that an American company receives here in the state of Indiana. So yes, there are some more issues that deal with the U.S. Steel sale that I would love to discuss, but what I am most focused on with the sale is making sure that we assess them properly, that they pay their fair share, and that they provide property tax dollars to the to the city of Gary, to the Gary Community School Corporation, to the Gary International Airport, and to the Gary Transportation Corporation.
Thank you. Heather, you have 90 seconds.
Repeat the question.
Yeah. How does the state stop the sale of a private business, or any business?
Yeah, and I think that that's perhaps one of the reasons why this has risen to the federal level, who's looking at this and having a foreign entity own industry within our country. And it's a big issue, and it'll be interesting to see how that goes in terms of even effectuating this sale, whether it will happen or not, and some of the implications of that for us as a nation as a whole. So definitely keeping an eye on that. But in terms, to go back to this issue of the assessment of the taxes, it appears to me that this has been going on quite some time with the current owners as far as how these taxes are assessed through a self-assessment. I guess where I'm making a distinction is why is a sale a trigger for that? We know that we have limited resources in the city of Gary for the things that we need, that those taxes would assist us with in improving our city greatly. So I think that that's something that should be looked at independently regardless of a sale. And I think the time is now. You know, the time could have been 5 years ago. So I think that's an important issue to remember.
Thank you. Answering first on this next question will be Heather. Where do you feel a convention center should be built in District 3? Should District 3 be chosen for the convention center? Or if a convention center decides to get built at all?
Okay. Well, you know, I know the Regional Development Authority commissioned a study that was directed by the legislature to look at where the best locations would be. I know a few of those locations would benefit District 3 to the tune of, I believe it's about $3.5 million in tax revenues from that convention center for the state. So that's huge. The Patriot Park in Hobart was one of those. I believe that topped the list. And also the Hard Rock Casino has the location for that convention center. I would support either. I know the old location of the Radisson was also one. I think all these locations would greatly benefit and allow District 3 to prosper. They're both by thoroughfares. Makes sense. I think a lot will come down to the developers that step up, the resources available, and how that turns out. But I don't see how District 3 can lose in this. They're all great locations.
Thank you. Reagan, you have 90 seconds.
Thank you. And this is this one touches my heart because I worked very closely with Senator Eddie Melton, now Mayor Melton, on this Bill 434 last session. Also in that bill, we were able to bring $3 million in demolition funds to District 3 and dollars to expand the Transportation Development District that starts at 5th and Broadway at the train station and kind of the hub for the new double tracking station. But as far as the convention center goes, that process, as laid out in that bill that we worked on, is left to the RDA. The RDA has a number of great choices to choose from. 8094 is one of the most, or the busiest highway in the state of, in the country. And so no matter where it falls, it will be a benefit not just to Gary, but all of District 3 in the state of Indiana.
Thank you. And just a reminder, if you're listening to tonight's debate on Lakeshore Public Media 89.1 FM, I'm Tom Maloney, tonight's moderator. Joining us this evening are State Representative Ragen Hatcher and challenger and Hobart City Attorney Heather McCarthy. Answering first on this next question will be Ragen. If I have my place here. Following the United States Supreme Court's overturning of Roe v. Wade, Indiana was one of the first states to pass restrictions on access to abortion. What is your stance on abortion access in the Hoosier State?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And that was a dark day, not just for the country, but also for us for here in the state of Indiana. That session where we went through the abortion discussion brought out a number of feelings from all over the state of Indiana. On our side, within the Democrat caucus, we did not support the bill to restrict abortion rights in the state of Indiana. We continue to fight for those rights through the very end of session. Currently, the way that the country is going, I saw Arizona has gone back to a law from 1864 before Arizona was even Arizona. But we're seeing this trend. We will continue to fight for women's reproductive rights. We just had a terrible bill come up that took away the Medicaid benefit for parents of disabled children. Even with our multi-billion-dollar rainy day fund, we'll continue to fight for those parents. We'll continue to fight to make sure everybody has the health care and health dollars that they need to have a successful and healthy life.
Thank you. Heather, you have 90 seconds.
Yes, definitely an advocate for a woman's right to choose whatever health treatments she feels are necessary, to have autonomy over her body. In a broader perspective, as individuals, we should all have that right to make decisions about our health care, and they should be private decisions between ourselves and a physician. So very important. I think very much need to continue to fight for that as we see other states taking away those rights. So a very important piece of legislation that needs to be fought for. No compromises.
Thank you. Answering first on the next question will be Heather. What are your plans for foster kids in the Hoosier foster care system? Are there enough foster parents, and is there enough funding to support the system?
Mm-hmm. That's such an important piece, and we want to make sure that we take care of our most vulnerable children that are in our system. I've known a lot of foster parents. It's not an easy task. It's a lot of work and really a labor of love. I think we need more funding for those services. I think that it's necessary to keep kids in the community. Anything to stabilize them, just like we talked about earlier, and providing supports to stabilize families. But I definitely think that the foster parent population has been overlooked and is a need for resources. And I think often with foster kids also, there's not the consistent attention that's given, that they don't have advocates. But we have a lot of great agencies within Lake County that serve District 3 who work on those issues, and I think that is a good place to redirect or to actually direct those resources.
Thank you. Reagan, you have 90 seconds.
Thank you. We know that foster care in the state of Indiana is not funded in the way that it needs to be. And so there are a number of programs around the state that help with these getting kids placed. I was lucky enough to be asked to provide legal services, pro bono of course, to Nicholas Neal and the Gymnast program with Fatherhood Initiative. What we did was we took kids whose moms had lost their parental rights. We went out, we searched for the fathers, and we put those fathers with those kids. Many of the fathers didn't know that they had those kids out there. But I'll tell you what, out of over 100 fathers that I worked with in that program, every single one of them stepped up when they found out. And they took those kids out of foster care. I think we have to do more family placement. We have to look not just for the fathers, but we have to look for aunts, uncles, sisters, brothers who may have aged out and support them in taking those children in. We want to make sure families stay together. And whatever we can do to do that, we should fund that. Thank you.
Thank you. Answering first on this question number 12 is going to be Reagan regarding Title I schools. Title I programs for schools, I had to look it up as well, is with regards to free or reduced lunches. When 40% of schools in a school qualify for free or reduced lunch, then the school is eligible for Title I benefits. So with that caveat and background of information, I hope I got it correct. Would you accept federal dollars for Title I programs for public schools in Northwest Indiana?
Absolutely. When I was the attorney for the Gary Community School Corporation, it was the Title I dollars that really supported most of those kids. The ones that may get into the third grade and not be able to read proficiently, those Title I dollars gave the schools the opportunity to hire someone to pull them out of class, to teach them not just how to read, but other reading comprehension skills. Title I dollars also support summer school programs for children, after-school programs for children, and other programs that help support them during the summer for good lunches and good breakfasts. So when you see the kids going to the school on a Monday and picking up a box of food, that is from Title I money, and they have that food for the rest of the week. They do it once a week, and they go throughout the summer. Title I dollars are extremely important in low-income and in minority communities. So yes, I would absolutely take Title I dollars. They're there for our children, and there's no reason to reject them.
Thank you. Heather, you have 90 seconds.
Can you repeat the question real quick?
Yes. Would you accept federal dollars for Title I programs for public schools in Northwest Indiana?
Yes, I think that's an extremely important resource. We want our kids in school. I think this is one of the issues. I mentioned attendance earlier, but just a basic need to have adequate food, to be able to be nourished and ready to learn when you get to school is so important. We deal with a lot of issues throughout the district with what we call food deserts. We need to supply, you know, an option for families, especially our most vulnerable families, so that they have what they need to thrive in our community, plus the additional services that Title I could offer. So, yeah, I think that's a pretty easy question, and that we should be accepting that and managing it appropriately.
Okay. Answering first on this question will be Heather, coming from the audience. It's a two-parter, so I'll ask all of it together here. Would you propose to curb the impact on taxpayers and school districts regarding referenda voting for public school funding? First question. Second one, and do you agree with current legislation that supports sharing of public school funds and assets with parochial or private for-profit education corporations?
Okay. Can you read just the first one?
Yes. How would you propose to curb the impact on taxpayers and school districts regarding referenda voting for public school funding?
Yeah, I know referenda funding has really been an issue for some communities. I think we saw that in the city of Hammond. We have Lake Station just recently went through a referendum. This is kind of, you know, when we have the tax caps, this is kind of a result of having the tax caps. So we have to kind of weigh and understand as a community the importance of education and the importance of supporting these referendum. I think that Lake Stations goes through, I want to say 2025, their current referendum, but so important. And a lot of that is just making sure community members, residents know just because you don't have a child in school, having these funds to educate our kids are so important when it comes to a realm of issues in the community prospering, whether it's, you know, community safety, all kinds of issues that keep public education so important. The second tier of that question in regards to no, that's fine. Private schools, no, I don't agree with that. I think that's fine. I think that if families have the capacity to send their kids and the funds to a private school, that's wonderful. But we need to focus on the public schools and improving them and not divert funds to private schools.
Thank you. Reagan, you have 90 seconds. Yes. First, would you propose to curb the impact on taxpayers and school districts regarding referenda voting for public school funding? Second question, and do you agree with current legislation that supports sharing of public school funds and assets with parochial and/or private for-profit education corporations?
First, I'm going to answer the second question. This was something that we fought against in the last legislative session. They wanted to split the referendum dollars that were raised with charter schools, not necessarily private schools. But because public schools are run by public dollars, we fought against that and were successful. No, I do not think that those referenda dollars or public dollars should be used to support private or parochial schools. Further, with the referenda, the reason that we're in the referendum situation where we have to raise money like this and where we have to raise our tax levies is because of the lack of property taxes that we receive from our industry in Northwest Indiana. And this takes us back to the tax issue with U.S. Steel and other steel mills along the lakefront. We are losing dollars unnecessarily because of the legislation that was passed. What we must do is we have to realign our tax structure in the state of Indiana and not just Northwest Indiana. We have to make sure the industry pays their fair share, commercial pay their fair share, and so the people who live in these communities can pay their property taxes and not lose their homes. Thank you.
Thank you. And Reagan, you'll be going first on this next question. With the environment, education, and workforce development being controlled by Republicans for the last dozen years or so, what do you think is the main goal to see and spur in Northwest Indiana to raise the quality of life for all of the region?
I think we're already doing that. I think that Senate Bill 434, that was a economic driver for Northwest Indiana. No matter where the convention center goes, Northwest Indiana will benefit from that, not just with jobs in the hospitality space, with other businesses that will surround that convention center and feed from that convention center. What we continue to do in Indianapolis is work on policy that changes the way Northwest Indiana's taxes are assessed, the way Northwest Indiana's policies are driven, and the way that the government is structured. And so as we continue to do that, you will continue to see benefits as we are currently seeing with the TDD. We just received $3 million here, and we'll continue to have those kind of wins and successes as long as we stay on the current path.
Heather.
Repeat the question, please.
Yep. With the environment, education, and workforce development being controlled by the Republicans for the last dozen years or so, what do you think is the main goal to see and spur in Northwest Indiana to raise the quality of life for all the region?
I think one of the important things we definitely need in drivers for economic development. Indiana is also booming right now with technology. The state has been given funds through the National Institute of Science for these semiconductor hubs and chips and technology. We have, I believe it's Google's coming to Fort Wayne, and I think it's Meta to South Bend. There's no reason why District 3 can't take advantage of some of those opportunities, and especially exposure for our children in technology, so that they, you know, I don't see why we can't be a hub for that. And the exposing our children to that is so important. I mean, we want kids who can be educated in our community, who can find jobs in our community and raise their families in our community. That's so important. So I think that it's time we thought about leveraging some of that, looking at how that can be offered within District 3 in terms of improving technology studies and also leveraging some of those dollars for our community.
Thank you. Going first on this next question will be Heather. Due to the raising of old homes and buildings making way for development, how dedicated would you be if elected to stop more industry pollution from moving into the area and buying up land? So industry pollution, and then I assume they mean businesses also buying up land.
I think that's a very important part right now. We're seeing large conglomerates buying up a lot of land, whether it's for development, homes, farmland. It's a very big issue. So, you know, with firm development plans, and I talked a little bit earlier about having some type of consortium or roundtable within the district, so we all know what each other's doing in terms of development and the assets we have, and having strong plans, whether, you know, that's the transit-oriented district in Gary, new industry or businesses coming to Lake Station, and some of the things that Hobart's been working on and planning, so that we can really use a lot of that is using our tools at the local level in terms of our planning, our development commissions, and being more selective on the type of groups that we allow in, that allow our community to thrive. And also in terms of the environment, always having environmental groups, not just from one sector, but from all sectors, having a voice in guiding us through that. But I would be very much proactive. We have enough industry in our region, and start looking at other ways of developing our businesses, small and large.
Thank you. Reagan.
Thank you. One of the things that we decided this past session in Indianapolis was the Northwest Indiana delegation would not accept one more industrial company coming into Northwest Indiana. We learned in dealing with Fulcrum how soft IDEM's rules are for air pollution and water pollution, and we've been working to strengthen those through legislation and the regulations of IDEM. What we also do is work closely with the City Council, especially here in the city of Gary, where we have so much industry, to make sure that those the zoning is not changed in those areas to permit those types of industry from coming into the community. So beyond IDEM's rules, we want to make sure that not one more industrialized company comes into District 3.
Thank you. Answering first on this next question will be Reagan. Having available affordable housing is an issue in District 3 and throughout the state. How would you make housing a priority for Northwest Indiana residents?
As a member of the Government and Regulatory Reform Committee in the House in Indianapolis, one of the things that we fought for this time was making sure that urban areas had just as much funding as rural areas. What the original bill said was that urban areas will receive 20% of new housing funding, while rural areas would receive 80%. Well, we fought and made sure that urban areas got up to the 40% threshold and rural areas had 60%. They were focused on rural areas because those were the areas that had seen less development, where the hub of the development had been in Northwest Indiana, Indianapolis, in the South Bend, Fort Wayne area. And so just within that piece of legislation, we were able to give urban areas an opportunity to improve their infrastructure, their streets, and their sidewalks in new areas of their community, so housing could be built there and they could start attracting housing developers. There are a number of other pieces of legislation that came through government and regulatory reform for housing that benefits Northwest Indiana, but also benefits the entire state of Indiana.
Thank you. Heather, you have 90 seconds.
Could you repeat the question, please?
Having available affordable housing is an issue in District 3 and throughout the state. How would you make housing a priority here in the region?
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I think that's a huge priority. We want people, our families and our community members being homeowners. That adds to the stability within the community. Working within City Hall and the city of Hobart, working in development issues in the city of Gary, I think it's critical. I think the incentives that discussed are needed, but I think we also in our planning, there's a lot of creative ways now. We got a lot of buildings. We have a lot of office space in the city of Hobart. We have a lot of buildings that still could be refurbished within the city of Gary. A lot of these stumbling blocks to that often does come to zoning and difficulties with developers coming in and doing the things they need to do to those properties to make them that they could be condominiums, homes for people. So I think that's one thing, just working locally, that I really saw as an issue that we need to tackle. It doesn't always have to be new development. We have opportunities to use structures we have, and I think we really need to make that more amicable to developers to come in, and of course having a clear plan with that. But I think that's a solution to a lot of these issues.
Thank you. This is going to be the final question of the evening. It's a mashup from myself and the audience. Again, please hold your applause. We still have closing statements. States across the country and here in the Midwest have voted to legalize recreational marijuana use. Recent polling shows that over 60% of likely Republican voters supports the legalization of marijuana. Clearly an issue that brings both sides together. I know it's a Democratic primary. What is your stance on the legalization of marijuana and the policing of marijuana in the state, should the state not legalize it? Heather, you have 90 seconds.
First question, legalizing marijuana. I am definitely in favor of legalizing medicinal marijuana. I think that's important. I think it's been shown to help a lot of people with a lot of variety of ailments, and I think that that's something we should be doing. Recreational marijuana, we're bordered by states where it is legal. I just would want to make sure in looking how that happens, that we do in fact address issues of marketing to young children. I think, for young minds, we don't want to be exposing them to another drug that they could be marketed and have access to. So keeping those parameters and safeguards clear. In terms of the penalties for marijuana, that's really difficult. It's maddening to hear that we have people incarcerated for something that's legal in so many places. We have to follow the law, but I think that needs to be revisited regardless of what the state decides to do in regards to the harshness of that offense and the consequences of it.
Thank you. Reagan, you have 90 seconds.
Can you say that one more time for
Yep.
me?
States across the country and here in the Midwest have voted to legalize recreational marijuana use. What is your stance on the legalization and policing of marijuana?
Thank you. And so I just want to talk about a bill that I put forward the first two sessions that I was down, and it was for the medical use of marijuana and to roll that out in a pilot program in the same way that Illinois started their pilot program for medical marijuana. What we found from that was that the farmers are very much in favor of marijuana in the state of Indiana because they see their counterparts in other states growing it and selling it and not being able to do the same. They're losing dollars. Further, we got a big response from the veterans because the veterans would like to have the opportunity to use medical marijuana for some issues that they face as well. So the Courts and Criminal Code Committee, which I was the ranking member on, we passed a bill that reduced the penalty of those who had been already incarcerated for marijuana possession, and we were able to reduce that to make sure that they had time served on many of the crimes. And these were the smaller amounts, these weren't large amounts, but it was a start. We've used that to build from, to continue to do that each session. I think that it's time for Indiana to catch up with Michigan and Illinois and other states around the country and at least begin the process of legalizing marijuana in Indiana.
Thank you. All right, for the actual final question, you all thought we weren't going to have that tonight, right? Yeah, it's my favorite question. Some of you know what's coming. Answering first on this question will be Reagan. What is something about the opposing candidate that would make them a good fit for state representative?
Well, I think that one of the things that I found in Indianapolis when I first went down was that my legal background was definitely a plus. I was used to looking at statutes and other laws in the state of Indiana, and being in that space, it was a natural fit. So I think that is something that is a benefit of my opponent.
Okay. Heather, you have 90 seconds.
Yeah, I just want to say, over the years, I've represented numerous elected officials. I know the pressures they face and how difficult that job can be. What's also climbing up a mountain and requires a ton of sacrifice is running for office. That's, something that requires discipline and commitment, and it's always an admirable reflection on someone to have that desire to serve. So I think that that's something that we both share in sitting here this evening, and is certainly a great attribute.
Okay. Now for closing statements, please wait until both candidates are done with closing statements to applaud. As we had selected members at the beginning of the debate, Ragen went first with her opening statement, and now Heather will go first for her closing statement. You have 90 seconds.
Thank you. Yeah, I just, working locally in District 3, serving the local governments and the residents, I've worked hard for them, and have that same commitment to work at the state level, to ensuring relationships are made that haven't been made, strengthening ones that are there. I believe in inclusive government, where everyone has a voice. So I am committed to building all the relationships I have within the district from each of the communities, Gary, Hobart, New Chicago, Lake Station. And I thank those of you who have supported me. Moving forward, I hope we can continue to work together in this capacity, and that you'll allow me to work hard for you as your state representative. I want to just say some thank yous in closing. I think so thankful for my supporters who are here tonight, who've been with me, for my family. My daughter-in-law is in the front seat, Shaquila McCarthy. My son and my grandson also live in Gary with me. We have a vested interest in District 3 being the best it can be, and everyone who made this night possible so people can get to know each of us better. So thank you.
Thank you. Ragen, you have 90 seconds.
Thank you. First, I'd like to thank Lakeshore Public Media and the League of Women Voters, again, RISE in Northwest Indiana, for providing this forum to us. The most important thing I'd like for you to take away from this is the importance of voting. We have to get our numbers up. We have to get the people out to vote, whether that be absentee, early voting, or voting on Election Day. So please encourage someone to vote when you leave here tonight. But I'd like to thank everyone who came out, everyone who's listening, all my wonderful supporters. But most of all, I have to thank my 3 biggest supporters in my life. And they are sitting in the back row. It's my mom, Ruth Hatcher, my daughter, Lauren Wooden, and my son, Anderson Wooden. And so with that, I'd just like to ask for your continued support, and I would love to continue to be your state representative. Thank you.
You may applaud. And just a reminder, folks, early voting has already begun. Election Day is Tuesday, May 7th, and you can find out more information about these candidates and all the other candidates on your ballot at vote411.org. I'm Tom Maloney for Lakeshore Public Media. Thank you so much for joining us for this evening's debate.